something a bit different. Gotta make a video for the day. And the way we're gonna do that is we're just gonna put a quick tier list together. I'm hoping this only lasts like, I don't know, 10 minutes? Maybe 15? I mean, how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 28 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That'd be 35 restricted total. I mean, there's going to be a few of these where I just have nothing to say. Like, let's get a few easy ones out of the way. 1, 2. Absolutely no reason to discuss those. They're bad. They're not really made for battling, but they're restricted. It's silly. I think we'll go in order just to streamline the process. And the first one we got, Koraidon. Where to put Koraidon? I don't feel like Koraidon's S tier, but it's got to be A tier. So I'm gonna put Koraidon A tier because as a Sunsetter, it already has an amazing niche with the Paradox Pokemon. That starts it off in a massive plus. That alone gets it to A tier. Yeah, it's pretty solid stats. It's like 135 or something like that, and its attack stat, which gets 1.3 in the sun, it's amazing. The raw damage is amazing. The same is true with Collision Course getting the 1.5, the 1.3. Getting the multiplier to damage on super effective hits, it's super good for just running through Pokemon like Terapagos, like the Kyurem forms, like Black and White. And any Pokemon that is weak to it gets folded pretty quick by things like Collision Course because of the multiplications. What else? It's the 135 speed is really, really nice since you can have a Scarf variant, you can have a Tailwind Choice Band variant, you can run really a lot of things. Clear Amulet's a really great item for Koraidon. But again, to circle it back to the most important thing, it sets up the Paradox Pokemon. So as long as Koraidon has flexibility in how it's used, it'll be really easy to consistently hold weather and use Paradox teams that rely on Protostants to win. Which is why it's going A tier. It's not going to S tier because, unlike Miraidon, which I'm about to talk about next, it doesn't have the raw output to be a super strong Pokemon on its own. And that makes it not quite as good. Not quite S tier. The raw output is not quite there. Moving on. There's not necessarily a lot to say about Miraidon that I haven't said about Koraidon. As a Paradox Pokemon setter, it's not actually quite as good because the counterplay to terrain is it's not as great. Like there's always going to be Rillabooms out there, so it can be very easy to shut down Miraidon and its strategies. But you pop a Choice Backs on that thing, you run generally high speed, and you're continuously spamming Volt Switch. It's very difficult for them to claim terrain, especially if you're running, not necessarily Paradox Pokemon, but strong Pokemon that can break through Rillaboom quickly. Yeah. The reason Miraidon's going S tier where Koraidon was A tier is that when it's set up, when it's clicking it the big damage move, it's essentially unstoppable. That's about all there really is to it. It is unbelievably strong. Yeah, that's about it. And it's the ability to pivot for massive damage is also pretty amazing. I don't really have more to say to that, so I'm going to move on to Terapagos. And yeah. There's a part of me that wants to put it S tier because I've played so many Terapagos in tournaments as of late, and I've played this one team over and over again, and I just can't beat it. It really bugs me every time. It's really good. It's really, really good. I'm gonna put it S tier. So, my thought is having Terra Shell to resist the first hit is fabulous. unbeatably strong. It's multi-scale on steroids. Besides that, it's just got generally high bulk, 90 HP in his Trastal form, with the 110 both defenses. That's really great. After a Calm Mind or two, it's doing great damage onto anything, whilst also bolstering even more bulk. Like, it's really difficult to get rid of it quickly. It can be tough. Of course, Trastal form is not its only form. What you're looking at now is the Trastal form. Once Tropico's goes into Terra Stellar, it gets a boost to its HP, but that's about it. Terra Starstorm becomes a spread move, and it hits as stellar damage, which is, pretty stellar, I dare say. And that's all well and good. It becomes even more of a defensive behemoth. But to me, the clear thing that makes Tropico's better than a lot of other Pokemon is that it can just say, you're reliant on weather conditions, terrain effects, so on. Bang, gone. No more. No terrain, no weather. It's a very catch-all sort of Pokemon for just saying, it doesn't matter what the strategy is, it's gone, it's over, we're not dealing with it. Weirdly, I've seen Tropico's paired a lot with Rillaboom, so it'll terrestrialize and then get rid of its own terrain, which is a bit weird. You know what, the strategies with Tropico's are slightly clunky, so I'm going to move it down to A tier, but I'm certainly going to put it above Koraidon, because I think Tropico's is just more consistent. Like, way more consistent. I don't know if it's relative to Miraidon, but it's certainly better than Koraidon. That's about where I'm at. Again, there's not really more to say about that, so I'm going to move on. Mewtwo's going to be really tough to think about here. I've played Mewtwo once and I stomped it. It's not as if Mewtwo's not useless. I'm going to throw it in C tier for now. It's Calyrex, but worse stats. Like, significantly worse stats. If you're talking about Mewtwo in the context of a format where Calyrex is available, it's just not good. It's completely outclassed by Calyrex Shadow. It's not quite as bulky. It's not quite as good on the damage. It's not quite as fast. The ability isn't half as good. Neither of them are. Pressure and Unnerve aren't amazing abilities. And even then, Calyrex has Unnerve built into it, so I mean, as a size span Pokemon, it could probably be strong, but again, there are going to be other Psychic types that come up that are just going to do a better job of that. It has occurred to me that we haven't put Calyrex on there. I'm going to put it D tier. Alone, base Calyrex is just not good as a restricted. Once it's fused, it's amazing, but there's no point bringing up the base Calyrex since it's not useful. It just isn't. Not even close to useful. Speaking of Lugia, I think Lugia is better than Mewtwo. Exclusively by the standard of the fact that it gets Calm Mind, and that there's that team floating around with Calm Mind, Lugia, and Floral Healing Comfey, which is pretty neat. I don't think the strategy itself is super airtight, and I imagine if you put that strategy in the hands of a really high level player, that it wouldn't hold out in high level play. But I haven't reached that level of play yet. So when I see the strategy, it's usually pretty strong. That's about all I have to say. Obviously, I think Pressure's the other ability. It's not good. Not at all. Aeroblast is nice. I'm pretty sure it gets Expanding Force, so it could be used as a side spam sweeper. Even if it doesn't, you pop it on terrain, +1, Psychic starts breaking things pretty easy. That's about all there is to it. Ho-Oh. It's bad. It's bad. I've seen Ho-Oh too many times for how easily I stomp it. Like, I don't think I've ever lost to a Ho-Oh team before. I don't think I've gone more than two Pokemon on my side of the field taken against a Ho-Oh. Like, it just doesn't work at all. I could put it into D tier, but actually, no, I am going to put it into D tier. Like, it just doesn't work at all. It's bad. In theory, like, on paper, it's not the worst. Rock-type moves aren't crazy in the format, so that massive weakness isn't necessarily hindering it too much, but then you think about it and you're like, wait a minute. This thing just can't do anything that Entei can either. Like, it's better than Entei, but it feels essentially the same niche. Maybe 10-20% better, but not at a margin large enough that it's worth your restricted slot. Certainly not to the point where it's worth not just using an Entei instead. So, that's about all I have to say about Ho-Oh. It's rough. Kyogre. To me, it basically comes down to, is it better than Koraidon? For now, I'll put it lower because I just feel like, one, you turn off the strategy, like you turn off the rain and suddenly Kyogre's not amazing. Like, I had a variant of the Chi-Yu Iron Ball team that ran Tornadus just to set up Sun or Snow as appropriate, and that variant of the team handled Kyogre super well. Like, I don't think I lost to Kyogre very often in those kind of battles, because you turn off the central strategy being Water Spout, and then even at 150 base power before stab, it just doesn't do as much damage as you need it to do. Like, it's a big nuke button, and if you take the nuke button away from Kyogre, it's not got a lot. Origin Pulse can miss, and it's not hugely powerful, though it does spread damage, which is really nice. Water Spout's the same thing, but as the game goes on, it's going to become even harder to use it. Thunder's pretty nice. It pairs really well with the rain. That's all I have to really say there. I've said a lot of negatives. It's worth noting that even though shutting it down is very much possible, it's very possible, it's pretty easy. If you don't have the counterplay, or you get caught out of position against Kyogre, it starts ripping through your team. Quick, efficient, not at all difficult. It's tough. That thing starts ripping through your team. Like, you get caught out of position, there's not a lot you can do. You're probably sacrificing your Weather Setter since, as of now, it's either Groudon, Ninetales, or Torkoal. And no one of them is necessarily going to be taking that hit particularly well. Like, Assault Vest, Groudon, or Torkoal after Terra could take it pretty well, but that's a big commitment in any game to Terra them and continuously pivot. Like, it works, but it's not really what people want to be doing with their Terra. It should be, to me, it should be a big defensive play that swings the tide, or it's a massive offensive play that gets you over the line at a point where it matters. And you're forcing people to drag their Terra out to play ball. It's not great. That's about all I really have to say about Kyogre. Terra Water Spout in the rain, big damage. It's essentially the same as Miraidon nuking something, but, Miraidon doesn't have quite a hard time, quite as much counterplay, since there's one prankster terrain setter, I think. That's not true. There's one prankster electric terrain setter, that being Thundurus. But there's tons of ways to set up terrain for basically everything else, so that's why I'm putting Kyogre there. The one other thing I want to say about Kyogre is that it doesn't quite have the utility of Koraidon setting up Protosynth, where Kyogre doesn't do that, though it does have the benefit of shutting down Protosynth for teams that rely on it, so net positive. Big G Groudon. In the current format, I don't feel like Groudon's that great. I did make a team with it, and I pretty much immediately scrapped it. I'm going to put it B tier. I think it's better than... do I think it's better than Lugia? Yeah, I do. It's Kyogre, but because it's the current regulation, I just don't think it's quite as good it does all the same things as Kyogre. It does have the utility of setting up Protosynth, which is why I'm going to change my mind and put it into A tier. Like, it sets up Protosynth, which is nice. But besides that, it doesn't have the raw output of Kyogre. And it doesn't have the raw output of... I'm struggling. Like, it's not as good as Kyogre or Koraidon, but I feel like it's better than B tier. All of the things that make Kyogre good make Groudon good, but not quite to the same extent. That's where I struggle. It's not like it's Primal Groudon where it's got the fire type stab on moves, and suddenly like things like Heat Crash and Fire Punch are doing a lot more damage. I'm gonna leave it A tier. I don't really have a lot to say about Groudon. Setting up the sun's good. Protosynth makes people happy. Ground type damage is always good. It's just not as strong as the rest. I'm gonna put Rayquaza as a B tier. Like, you know, you'd have Terra Normal E-Speed with Chien-Pao. Turning off the weather is really nice. Kind of all I really have to say about it. Like, there's one specific strategy. It works. Maybe not as well as I wish it would. I really like Rayquaza. Yeah, there's not a lot to say there. Terra Normal E-Speed makes good damage. Put a Life Orb but with Choice Band on it, and it's doing big damage. You put it next to a Chien-Pao, even more damage. But that's about all there is to it. Dragon Ascent does good damage. Outrage is good damage, though you'd probably rather be running Draco Meteor. Either way, it's not really a deep Pokemon. It has one specific thing that it does really well, and it does that. Weirdly enough, Ho-Oh and Rayquaza have a pretty similar problem. It's that Entei can also do that, and they don't necessarily do it as well as Entei. Like, as a restricted, you want Rayquaza doing more, but at the same time, Entei's got like 110 attack, Rayquaza's got like 130. And also Rayquaza has a lot more depth of offense, where Ho-Oh versus Entei, it's like the actual damage that Ho-Oh and Entei are doing is basically the same. So wasting a restricted slot on so wasting the restricted slot on Ho-Oh ends up being a lot less valuable. Origin form Dialga. B tier. Decent bulk. Good offense. The Adamant Crystal boosting its stabs is really nice. On paper it should be really good. It's just not broken enough. I mean, I really want to move Groudon. So I feel like I'm going to put Groudon in B tier. Now that I think about it. Groudon's just not broken like anything else in A or S tier. There's not necessarily a lot to say about Dialga. You know, it can do damage, just not as much as anything else. Not as much as anything in A tier or above. It's generally bulky, and yeah, it's kind of fast-ish. If you put it in Tailwind, it's decent. The problem is that it has no particular niche. It's good as a telepathy user, I guess. That's about it. Might as well just quickly get Dialga out of the way, and Palkia. They're strictly worse versions of their origin forms. That's about all there is to it. Obviously, you have the flexibility to run a new item, but that's about it. Palkia, I think it's better than Dialga Origin, just because it has the niche of setting up Trick Room and being somewhat bulky. I'm not sure what the speed stat is. I'm going to quickly look that up because I'm saying a lot about the speed, but I don't actually know for sure. Ooh, Showdown is lagging like crazy. I might just... Nope, we're good. We're good. Poke. Yeah, 120 speed. As a Trick Room setter specifically, it's not great, but it does have good bulk to do it. So as a Trick Room setter, has the bulk to play, but Palkia can't do that. Like the actual, once it's in Trick Room, it's not very useful. Again, raw output's decent. It's just not broken compared to anything else that's already on the tier list. Giratina. I'm actually gonna move them down. And I'm gonna put Giratina below them as well, since I don't think I've ever seen Giratina, and I can't even think of a niche for it. Putting Giratina in B tier is so generous. I've literally never seen it come up before. I think it probably has more potential than Ho-Oh. I think Ho-Oh's pretty bad. But like, what are they gonna do in any given game? I just don't know. They can put status out there, but their output's not particularly good. I just don't see them having a particular niche. Dialga and Palkia can work as Trick Room setters, but I just don't know what Giratina does. Part of it's ignorance to what it can do. At the same time, I look at it, it's like it's walking weaknesses. Weak to all those powerful dragon types. Weak to Incineroar dark type attacks. Weak to Gambit sucker punches. Weak to Chien-Pao sucker punches. Like, it's weak to everything that's good, and I don't really see how it contributes to a game. So I'm gonna put it in C tier on the idea that it maybe it has a value. I feel in my gut, my gut is telling me that it's better than Ho-Oh, and maybe that's just because I really hate Ho-Oh competitively, because it should be good, and it never has been. Reshiram. It's either C or B for me. Top of C tier is very much. I think it's either top of C tier or bottom of B tier. I've seen a decent few of these. Like, they come up. Strong special attacker, not necessarily the strongest. I'll put it there. It's a Pokemon that doesn't necessarily have tons of depth. It does damage. That's about it. You pop a Life Orb or Choice Specs on it, and you watch it do big damage. It can generally run the numbers in terms of raw output, I guess. Can it though? Think about it. We're double checking that. I don't think it actually can. I'm saying that, but I really just don't think it can. Reshiram, 150 special attack. It's not bad. Decent bulk. Maybe it's not terrible. I just don't. It doesn't really have a specific strategy. Whereas I can kind of see how the Pokemon in B tier and above would specifically contribute to games. Reshiram's, it's a Pokemon. It does big damage. You put it next to a Chi-Yu and it probably does enough. But at the same time, Chi-Yu fills the same niche. Not nearly as well. It's like 30 points lower on the special attack, but it's good enough. And you can afford to run a special attacker like Kyogre or Terabagos or Miraidon with a Chi-Yu to take their special attacking, already decent special attacks, or, Miraidon special attack, and just, take it into a new league. And that leads pretty neatly into Zekrom. It kind of does the same thing, except I think it does it significantly worse. It's a physical attacker, which means it's not one of Game Freak's beloveds. Its best electric type move is not guaranteed to hit. Its best dragon type move is guaranteed to go into the right Pokemon. Even after setup, it's not necessarily huge damage with Dragon Claw. Like, +1 Sword of Ruin boosted Dragon Claws probably do a lot of damage, but for a Pokemon like Zekrom, it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. Because Zekrom relies on its boost to actually do damage, and it doesn't really get those boosts very often, which is why I'm going to put it mid C tier. I'm debating putting it below Dialga and Palkia because it has some sort of general outline of how you could use it, but it's not great. Yeah, I'm gonna put it below then. I just feel like defensively, Dialga and Palkia are way better, and also like I can visualize how I would use those two more than how I can visualize how I'd use Zekrom. Kyurem Black. We're getting back to Pokemon that are worth discussing again. A bit more in depth. Absolutely super massive attack stat. I'm going to put it at B tier, above Rayquaza, because I've seen it before, and as a loaded dice user, Ice School Spear and attack like that can do really, really good damage. You put it next to a Chien-Pao, maybe you put it in Tailwind, maybe you make it a D-Dance user. Anything like that could be really strong. I think what's holding it back is that it just like Zekrom, it needs that turn of setup. It's just worth noting that turn of setup pays off a lot more with a Pokemon like Kyurem Black that could take advantage of Dragon and Ice Stab a little bit easier, especially because it has a higher attack stat. And I'm pretty sure it has the same speed stat, but besides that, I'm pretty sure it has more bulk relative to Zekrom. I'm going to double check that right now. That's not a Y. Doing the stat checks. Zekrom's got the 100 special defense, 120 defense, it's 100 health. Kyurem's got 125 health, 100 defense, 90 special defense. So it's actually not quite as bulky. You'd imagine the health makes up a little bit for it, but in general, Kyurem's a little bit less bulky. But it's got a ridiculous 170 attack stat, and it's slightly faster than Zekrom. Oh, I'm breaking things. In general, I just think it's better. It's just Zekrom, but better. I see it a few times, and it usually ends up ripping through Pokemon like Amoonguss even after Terra. Like, it's cheeky how strong it is. Kyurem White, I've seen it. It's basically the same thing, but on the special side. It's worth noting that I think Kyurem Black's better, because the only time I fought a Kyurem White, it was a one-sided stomping. But in spite of that negative talk, I still think it has value. There are a plethora of strong moves like Blizzard. It's the go-to. You put this thing in snow, it becomes a pretty bulky Pokemon. It clicks Blizzard, does pretty decent damage. Blizzard's not the greatest move. I mean, it's probably the best you're going to get on a Pokemon like Kyurem. But I don't think it gets a stronger Ice-type move, does it? I can check that. Kyurem White. It gets Ice Burn. But it's not a great move. It takes one turn to charge, and it has a 30% burn chance. I mean, most sets are going to be running probably Draco, Meteor, Blizzard, and Fusion Flare as a spec set, that specs or something like that. And maybe it runs like Earth Power or, I don't know, Glaciate for the speed drop. Yeah, it could be like Assault Vest Protect, and then you run it in the snow to be super tanks. Either way, it has value. I don't think it's quite as good as Kyurem, since it can't take as much advantage of D-Dance, but besides that, that's all there is to really say about it. Kyurem. Yeah, Kyurem. I'm going to put Kyurem D tier. It's Kyurem Black, it's Kyurem White, it's Zekrom, hell, it's even Reshiram, but strictly worse. Not a great type, defensively, which is something we haven't really brought up with the Kyurem forms. Dragon Ice isn't lovely defensively. Taking Fire-type attacks neutrally isn't fun. Steel, Rock, Fairy, Dragon, it's not it's not some super tank in the sense that it can actually resist a bunch of hits. I guess maybe they took good advantage of Terra, but even then, it's not great. But yeah, Kieran's just strictly worse. Like, I feel like these two have dedicated niches, and you know, Scar for specs, Kieran could be good. Hell, even loaded dice could be good. But it's basically just everything that makes these guys almost great. Everything that makes the other Kieran forms or Reshiram and Zekrom almost good is Kieran, but it's just less decisive. It's not decisive enough. It doesn't pick one thing and do it great. It chooses to do everything, but not as well as anything else. Solgaleo. I think I have a video against the Solgaleo. It's like Magician's Burden or something. I have nothing to say about Solgaleo. It's a Pokemon. It's not good against Incineroar. Big net negative. Full Metal Body's pretty decent as an ability. It does allow for stronger offense. I've seen it. It's generally bulky when I play against it. I'll put it above Zekrom. Since it certainly is, I feel like it's stronger than Zekrom. Like, generally feels bulkier. Feels like it's putting out more damage than Zekrom. Like, in theory, it's basically just Zekrom but worse. Because it gets like Flame Charge, and I'm pretty sure it gets Howl or Swords Dance or something like that to boost its attack. But you could always just run like Choice Band or Life Orb to do that. Yeah, just really just not a lot to say about Zekrom and Solgaleo more specifically. Like, Zekrom is more interesting, even if I think it's not quite as good. There he is. This is gonna be my next A tier. Shadow Shield. Super frustrating to play against. It gets a Calm Mind or a Meteor Beam off, and it's just. And besides that, it gets Wide Guard. Its typing is really bad, but it can Terrestrialize. And as a Pokemon that likes to Terra Fairy, I'm 99% sure it has things like Dazzling Gleam or Moonblast that's going to want to take advantage of once it's Terra'd. So, there's not necessarily a lot to say about it. It clicks Calm Mind, it Terrestrializes, and then it tries to do big damage and live a long time, taking advantage of grassy terrain and leftovers to keep Shadow Shield online as much as possible. Pretty good. It's just all round consistent, easy to play Pokemon. Keep it healthy. Keep clicking Calm Mind, and then watch things disappear. This is Duskmane Necrozma? It's something like that. I can't remember the names. It's a Pokemon. With Prism Armor, it's pretty bulky. Let's start there. With Prism Armor, it's pretty bulky. So setting up in front of it is not impossible. You get a D-Dance or two off, and it's suddenly pretty strong. It's 145. Attack stack does work. And you can also work in a Trick Room setting, since it's like 55 speed. Since it's 55 speed, so it definitely has value, to say it nicely. That's about all it's got. Yeah, I don't necessarily have more to say about Duskmane. Like, it could work in Trick Room. It could work as a Dragon Dance setter. It does get Swords Dance. It can put out damage. It can take hits. In my eyes, it's the better version of Kieran Black specifically. I'm gonna put Dawn Wings in the same place. It does basically the same. Like, it's more Trick Room oriented when I see it. But it does mostly the same things as Lunala, but not as well because it doesn't have Shadow Shield. But it's bulky and it can take attacks decently. Like it can usually take one Dark type attack and lose most of its health, but it can still take that hit, which is a pretty good testament to how bulky it is. I'm gonna move it down a little bit. I see it a lot more than I see Rayquaza. So on usage, I'm gonna put it higher than Rayquaza, even if I think Rayquaza's maybe slightly better. They're pretty relative. I don't think either of these two, Rayquaza or Dawnwings, are particularly great. But they can be played, and they're not bad. They don't actively hurt your team, like I think Kyurem or Hoa would. Necrozma. I didn't even realize this was just restricted for a bit. I'm going to put it above Giratina. I've certainly thought about it, and I thought about it in the context of it not being restricted. As a restricted, it's pretty bad, actually. It's pretty bad. Like, if it's taking a restricted spot, it's pretty terrible. Like, in theory, it's decent enough to play a support Trick Room setter, but that's not what you use a restricted for. You want a restricted that can actually drive the pace and can decide how a game goes. And Necrozma doesn't do that. It barely has the stats to hang. Like, 97 in burst defense is like 97 health as well. It's decent. It's got like decent bulk. And with Prism Armor, it can take super effective hits. Okay. But it doesn't have great output. And its niche more sits in setting up Trick Room and in keeping the team healthy, which is not really what you need in a restricted format, or from your cornerstone Pokemon, which a restricted Pokemon should be. I'm not going to rank base Zacian or Zamazenta. It just doesn't seem worth my time. I'm going to rank Zacian below Lugia, but above the other Origin Pokemon, because I think Zacian's decent. Put it next to Chien-Pao. You get your stat boost, you click Behemoth Blade. Big damage. Big problem though. Zacian's main gimmick is hitting the field with +1 and then just ripping through a few things, and then the rest of your Pokemon clean up the game. Except for Incineroar, which can just easily shut down that whole plan by just switching it once. That's all it takes. You can't stop it. There's nothing you can do about it. If Incin wants you to take the stat drop, you're taking the stat drop. You can set up, but Zacian doesn't necessarily want to be, EV'd in a way that's going to bring out its longevity, since it's not quite fast enough to guarantee the outspeed on Calyrex. Though, in theory, it does have the speed to beat the current standard Calyrex setup sets. So, maybe? Yeah, maybe. The character play is immense, but in theory, when it gets going, it's really, really good. I think it's better. It's not better than Lugia. It might be better than Rayquaza, but it certainly isn't better than Lugia. Like, they fill the same niches, Zacian and Rayquaza. Zacian does it with raw speed stat, Rayquaza does it with E-speed. But, yeah, the kind of play to Zacian is just, it's too much. Rayquaza can reach a level of attack and then it won't have to go down from there, and that makes it better. Intimidate's not a threat to Rayquaza the same way that it is to Zacian. Zamazenta is going to be another A-tier Pokemon. I think it's strictly better than everything else besides Strabagos. Dauntless Shield, great ability. The +1 defense, pretty nice. You pair that with Body Press, you're instantly starting off with great damage that can't just be cut out by an annoying cat switching in. So that's already pretty great. Obviously, you have setup sets where you use Iron Defense and Body Press to just absolutely brutalize Pokemon. I find that's a pretty effective set. What else? The ability to spam wide guard is invaluable. It's frustrating that it's allowed to do that. What else? Heavy slam, really nice move. Since it's super heavy, it's always pretty much always getting a good damage roll on attacks. Love it. Noteworthy, Sword of Ruin doesn't reduce body presses damage. Like, it doesn't use the Sword of Ruin defense stat to calculate damage, so you get a more significant damage increase. You get a pretty significant damage increase on, what's it called? On Body Slam next to Champ Pao, which is really nice strategy. Besides that, like, it's just really consistent. It's not necessarily, it certainly isn't the best restricted, but it's one of those ones where you can pick it up and it's really hard to play Zacian. It's really hard to play Zamazenta bad, and that's what makes it good. Again, we're skipping the base forms. Eternities. It has a gimmick. Like, you click Cosmic Power and like Fire Spin and you stall. Like, it's just a stall Pokemon. It's not as if it doesn't work. Like, I've played it a lot of times and clearly people believe in it. And it's generally consistent. Like, I've definitely lost to it before. But, you know, it's nothing crazy. Like, it's a stall Pokemon through and through. That's all it is. That's about it. Like, there's really just not a lot to say about it. Like, it clicks Cosmic Power, gets super bulky, it gets crit, game over. That's basically how those games go. Or you just take it out really quickly before it sets up. Or you put it to sleep, since it pretty much never runs Safety Goggles or Terra Grass. Like, your options are plentiful to deal with it. It's a gimmicky stall strategy. It doesn't really work. We're at the final two. I think there's a lot more to say about Calyrex Ice, so I'll start with Calyrex Shadow. S tier. Clearly one of the best restricteds you can pick. It doesn't match up poorly into any particular restricted, except for Terapagos. But that's one restricted out of the other one. Out of like the other 32 ones, that other 32 legendaries that aren't D tier. Like, it's just really good. Astral Barrage, massive damage. You know, you have the bulky setup set that's been picking up. Decent speed, like, it aims to outspeed all non-boosted restricteds at the 135 speed. It's really clever. It works really well. It's very easy for Calyrex to come in late game and clean up. It has depth. It has it all. It's Mewtwo but like really good. Its ability is strictly better. Its typing is strictly worse. That's something worth noting. But it's good in the context of Calyrex because it has Astral Barrage, which makes it pretty fabulous. What else? It gets Nasty Plot, it gets Calm Mind, it gets enough physical bulk to live hits sometimes, to generally live hits if you run a little bit of bulk. Like, it is fabulous. It's the fastest restricted in the format. Though it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't even need to maximize its speed to consistently beat threats like Miraidon, like Koraidon, like what else? Like Zamazenta, like Zacian, all those generally fast Pokemon. Like, it doesn't need to be running those things. It beats Fluttermane, it beats a lot of Pokemon. Like, it only struggles against Scarfed Pokemon or boosted Pokemon, and even then, it usually has just enough bulk to live one hit after terrestrializing, which makes it super hard to beat consistently. One thing worth noting is that it doesn't quite have the utility that Miraidon or Calyrex Ice would have. Like, Miraidon sets up terrain and activates the Quark Drive Pokemon. It also allows that allows for Pokemon to be immune to sleep, which is really nice. Calyrex sets up Trick Room and abuses it really well. And of course it pairs with a lot of Trick Room Pokemon super well for unrelenting offense. Calyrex does the same thing for Tailwind, but it can't set Tailwind for itself, which is one massive differentiator. And speaking of Cali Ice, we're going to wrap this up nice and quick since I need to leave for work soon. Yep, we're doing a last minute video. It's great. Calyrex Ice, S tier. I think Calyrex Ice is better than... it's not better than Miraidon, but it's better than Calyrex Shadow, in my opinion. Whilst having a bad matchup into Calyrex Shadow, Calyrex Ice is a lot more self-sufficient in the same way that Miraidon is. It sets up its main strategy, and it can abuse it really well. It gets Swords Dance, so if it wants to boost, it can. It gets Bulk. I'm pretty sure it gets Bulk Up as well, so if it wants to boost slightly more holistically, it also can. It's one of those Pokemon where it's like, there's not necessarily a wrong way to use it. The downside to both Cali forms is that they're very vulnerable to Wide Guard, which is part of the reason that Zamazenta is really great. But they both learn good single target moves, high horsepower, Psychic, Shadow Ball, stuff like that. It's a bit more limited for Cali, which makes it a lot easier to play against. But similarly to Kyogre, the moment you're out of position in front of either Calyrex form for the matter, it's very, very difficult to recover. Noteworthy, most Pokemon can't live a neutral hit from Miraidon. Calyrex Ice can, and that's before the item, and that's without a special defense boosting nature, which is one massive reason that I really love it. Glacial Lance, love it, great move, hits tons of Pokemon for neutral and super effective. It, even with just a little investment, it can do up to 30% on less bulky Pokemon, less bulky variants of Insane. Like, it can do decent damage pretty consistently. And as a whole, Glacial Lance matches up really well into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You get the point. It matches up really well into a lot of restricteds with Glacial Lance. The same true with Astral Barrage. But again, they're both shut down by Wide Guard, which is where you need to have the depth. In terms of single target damage, Calyrex has that. I'm sorry, I can't just say Calyrex. In terms of single target damage, Calyrex Shadow has Cali Ice soundly beat. But because Calyrex is self-sufficient, and it sets itself and other Pokemon up really smoothly with Trick Room, I'm going to place it higher than Calyrex Shadow. We're at 48 minutes. I was like, oh, it's like 10, 15 minutes. No, I yapped. I yapped like my life depends on it. Overall, some Pokemon. Let's go through the tiers for one last little thing, just kind of identify what I think of the Pokemon in each tier, kind of holistically. C tier Pokemon, they're usable. Do I think they're good? No. Can they work in fringe and niche situations as gimmicky Pokemon? Sure. Are they ever going to be consistent or uber powerful like the S tier Pokemon? Never. That's kind of what I'm thinking with all of the Pokemon in C tier. B tier, to me, they have a general niche. You know, Duskmane is a Trick Room sweeper, so is Dawn Wings. You have E-Speed Chien-Pao users like Rayquaza. You have the same in Zacian. You have bulky setup sweepers like Lugia. You have Trick Room setters in the Origin form Pokemon. You have Groudon as a Sunsetter and a great Protosynth activator. It's stuff like that. They have clear niche on each team, even if they're not the best choice for any given team. A tier basically just describes consistent, easy to play, really just hard to get wrong, and it has no way at all of disadvantaging your team. Tropico's super tank. Zamazenta, super tank. Koraidon, utility has the sun setting utility with tons and tons of offense. Kyogre's the same story with a little bit less utility. And you have Lunala as like one of the most consistent Pokemon for just setup sweeps. That's what A tier is. It's those Pokemon that you can't really get wrong even if you're being experimental. They're always going to be good. S tier, even if the options are limited, the S tier Pokemon are like, there's not necessarily tons of ways to use Miraidon, but the one way that you could, that one specific way you use Miraidon, usually is just the way. You win when you use Miraidon. It's hard to beat. The raw scale of damage is much higher than any other tier. What else? The versatility is generally better. Miraidon can't be resisted. Three standard moves from Miraidon can't be resisted by anything. Sorry. The combination of three moves hits enough types so that it can never be resisted. That's not entirely true though. Technically, Electric Steel can do it, but don't talk about that, man, because that's not very good. But as a whole, these Pokemon are just super self-sufficient, super consistent. They alone can win battles. And when they're paired with other Pokemon, they can become very close to unstoppable in the right situations. Last but not least, D tier. They bad. They just really bad. Like, really bad. Like, Kyurem's the best Pokemon there, and it's decidedly worse than every single Pokemon that comes after it, and it's the strictly worst form of other Pokemon already on the list. The same is true of Ho-Oh and Necrozma, and we're not really going to talk in any depth about the other three, since they're basically just stepping stones towards Pokemon like Solgaleo, Dawnwings, and the Calyrex forms. They were never really intended to use in battle, and they're not. And that reflects in bad stats, limited move pools, essentially no strategies. That's all they really got. I guess I'll put a quick opinion on Zacian, Zamazenta base forms. Probably like C tier. If they weren't restricted as their base forms, different story. They'd be like S tier Pokemon as non-restricteds. As like, which is where I'd like to introduce like semi-restricted. Where it's like, they're not strong enough to be restricted, but they're too strong for regular formats. So you do a format where it's like semi-restricted. These are Pokemon that are decent. They're better than the rest, but they're not good enough to run the ones with the actual restricteds like Zacian Crown, Lunala, Calyrex, Ice Rider, stuff like that. That'd be my idea for like a semi-restricted. But basically, they're really, really great regular legendaries, but they don't. And they're probably better than a lot of the restricted legendaries on this list. Like, they'd probably crack top of C tier very easily. But even then, they don't have any, niche or value that's separate to the crown forms. Which is why they didn't make the list, since they're just the crown forms, but worse. I don't think I really have a lot more to say. The script isn't. The script's moving along. It's getting there. I haven't done a ton of work over the past 2 days. I've been going out, hanging out with my friends, going to the gym, doing stuff like that. It's still probably like another 2 or so weeks, as I talked about in the last video. That's about it. Probably 2 weeks. What I will say is a video about wheezing. That's all I'm gonna say. Actually, there's one more thing I'm gonna say, and that's just that in that video there's going to be discussion and review of games and strategies associated with wheezing. So look forward to that. Cool, right? Okay, I can't do the sambucha thing. That's disgusting. That's so gross. I couldn't pull it off. A wise man once said, "Even in defeat, I lose." Hopefully, one day I can be half as wise as he is. And yeah, thanks for watching.